The clock ticked impatiently on Mark's wrist, mirroring the frantic beat of his heart. He was late. Again. His boss, Mr. Henderson, a man whose patience was thinner than day-old coffee, would surely have his head. Mark cursed under his breath, weaving through the morning rush with the agility of a squirrel. He was a young man in a hurry, life a personal racetrack where he was always a lap behind. He believed the world owed him prompt service, immediate attention, and an unobstructed path to success. Mark was all sharp angles and restless energy, a stark contrast to the world's gentle curves and meandering pace. He considered himself a go-getter, a mover and shaker, someone destined for greatness. This self-imposed pressure cooker of ambition often led him to be short-tempered and dismissive of anyone he perceived as slowing him down. Little did he know, destiny had a very different kind of race planned for him, one where speed wouldn't win, but humility just might. He checked his watch again. Henderson was going to be furious. The weight of the coming day pressed down on him. He just needed coffee. A large, strong coffee. The aroma of roasted beans hit Mark like a comforting wave as he burst through the coffee shop door. But his brief moment of solace was quickly shattered. At the front of the line stood George, a man who seemed carved from granite and time. He moved with the deliberate slowness of a seasoned oak, each step measured, each movement considered. George was a veteran, a fact etched onto his face in the lines earned through years of service. He wore a simple baseball cap with the words Vietnam Veteran stitched across the front. He was carefully counting out coins to pay for his small black coffee, his hands slightly trembling with age. To Mark, this was an unbearable delay. Each second George spent fumbling with change felt like an eternity stolen from his already shrinking morning. Mark tapped his foot impatiently, his eyes darting around the shop as if searching for an escape route. He sighed dramatically, making sure George could hear his displeasure. This old man was ruining his day. He needed his coffee, and he needed it now. The line was his enemy, and George was its slow-moving general. The pressure was building inside him, ready to explode. "Come on, Grandpa, some of us have places to be," Mark blurted out, his voice dripping with sarcasm. He rolled his eyes, making a show of checking his watch again. The other customers in line shifted uncomfortably, but no one dared to say anything. George continued counting his coins, seemingly unfazed. Mark's frustration reached boiling point. "Seriously? Are you going to pay for that coffee 1 penny at a time? Maybe you should try getting a real job instead of mooching off the system," he sneered, his words laced with venom. He gestured towards George's Vietnam veteran cap. "What, did you even do anything over there, old-timer, or just sit around?" The barista behind the counter looked horrified, her hand flying to her mouth. George finally looked up, his eyes meeting Mark's. They were filled not with anger, but with a deep sadness that made Mark momentarily falter. But his arrogance quickly resurfaced. He smirked, crossing his arms, waiting for George to react. He wanted a fight, a release for his pent-up stress. He wanted to feel superior, even if just for a moment. He had no idea how wrong he was. George met Mark's hateful gaze with a quiet dignity that seemed to deflate Mark's anger momentarily. He finished counting out his coins, placing them carefully on the counter. "Son," he said, his voice raspy but firm, "I fought for your right to be impatient. I fought for your right to speak your mind, even when it's filled with unkindness. And I fought for your right to be wrong." He paused, his eyes holding Mark's. "I didn't sit around. I saw things you can't even imagine. Things that would haunt your dreams for the rest of your life. But I don't regret it. Because I did it for you, for your freedom. So, you're welcome." He took his coffee from the barista, offering her a small, genuine smile. "Thank you, dear." Then, without another word, he turned and walked towards the door, his back straight, his head held high. The coffee shop was silent, the air thick with unspoken judgment directed at Mark. Mark stood there, dumbfounded, the force of George's words hitting him like a physical blow. But the feeling quickly faded, replaced by a simmering resentment. He still needed his coffee, and he was still late. The veteran's words were just empty platitudes, he told himself. The world didn't work that way. Mark grabbed his coffee, practically inhaling it as he stormed out of the shop. The encounter with George had only fueled his anger and frustration. He fumbled with his car keys, unlocking the door with a frustrated jab. The engine roared to life, a mechanical expression of his inner turmoil. He peeled out of the parking lot, tires squealing in protest. His mind raced, replaying the scene in the coffee shop. He muttered under his breath, justifying his behavior. Old fool, slowing everyone down. He glanced at the speedometer, pushing the needle higher. He weaved in and out of traffic, cutting off other drivers without a second thought. His focus was solely on getting to work, on avoiding Mr. Henderson's wrath. He scrolled through his phone, firing off a quick text to his boss, running a few minutes late, sorry. He didn't really mean it. The road blurred into streaks of color as he accelerated further. He was a man possessed, driven by a self-imposed urgency that blinded him to the dangers around him. He was so focused on the destination that he completely ignored the journey, a journey that was about to take a devastating turn. 7 minutes. 7 minutes was all it took. 7 minutes of reckless driving, 7 minutes of simmering anger, 7 minutes of ignoring the world around him. A sudden screech of tires, a blaring horn, and then darkness. Mark had been so engrossed in his thoughts, so consumed by his own self-importance, that he hadn't seen the delivery truck pulling out from a side street. He slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. The impact was deafening, a violent collision of metal and glass. The airbags deployed, filling the car with a cloud of white powder. Mark's head snapped back, hitting the headrest with a sickening thud. He was momentarily stunned, disoriented. Then, the pain hit him, sharp and searing. He looked around, his vision blurry. The front of his car was crumpled like a discarded soda can. Smoke began to billow from the engine. He tried to open the door, but it was jammed. Panic seized him. He was trapped. And the smoke was getting thicker. He coughed, his lungs burning. He was in real trouble. This wasn't just about being late anymore. This was about survival. A horn blared nearby, snapping Mark further into reality. He could hear shouts, but they seemed distant, muffled by the ringing in his ears. Suddenly, a figure appeared at his window, a face peering through the shattered glass. It was George. George, who had been driving behind Mark after leaving the coffee shop, had witnessed the entire accident. Without hesitation, he slammed on his brakes and rushed to Mark's aid. The other drivers were hesitant, unsure of what to do, but George, battle-hardened and decisive, knew he had to act fast. He tried the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. He yelled to the growing crowd, "Someone, get me something to break the window." He didn't wait. He scanned the area, spotting a heavy wrench lying in the back of the delivery truck. He grabbed it and, with a surge of adrenaline fueled by years of ingrained instinct, smashed the wrench against the window. Glass shattered, creating an opening. Smoke billowed out, stinging his eyes, but he pressed on. He had a mission. He had a life to save. Even if that life belonged to the young man who had so cruelly mocked him just minutes before. Reaching inside the shattered window, George unbuckled Mark's seatbelt with surprising strength. "Grab my hand, son," he urged, his voice strained but steady. "We need to get you out of here." The car could explode. Mark, dazed and weak, managed to grip George's hand. The veteran pulled with all his might, dragging Mark through the jagged opening. It was a struggle, Mark's body heavy and unresponsive, but George persevered. Finally, with a grunt of effort, he pulled Mark free, dragging him a safe distance from the burning car. Just as they reached safety, flames erupted from the engine, engulfing the vehicle in a fiery inferno. The heat was intense, searing their skin. George shielded Mark with his own body, protecting him from the worst of the blast. He had done it. He had saved him. He looked down at Mark, who was lying on the ground, coughing and gasping for air. Mark's eyes fluttered open, focusing on George's face. Recognition dawned, followed by a wave of disbelief and shame. He couldn't believe it. The man he had so callously mocked had just saved his life. The weight of that realization crashed down on him, heavier than the wreckage of his car. You saved me," Mark stammered, his voice barely a whisper. He stared up at George, his face streaked with soot and tears. The reality of the situation slammed into him with full force. He had been so consumed by his own petty concerns, so blinded by his arrogance, that he had failed to see the true worth of the man standing before him. He remembered his cruel words, his dismissive attitude, his complete lack of respect. And now, this same man, the one he had treated so poorly, had risked his own life to save him. The irony was almost unbearable. He felt a wave of nausea wash over him, a mixture of physical pain and overwhelming guilt. He tried to sit up, but a sharp pain shot through his leg. He winced, collapsing back onto the ground. George gently placed a hand on his shoulder, his touch surprisingly gentle. "Just lie still, son," he said calmly. "The ambulance is on its way." Mark couldn't meet his gaze. He was drowning in shame, suffocating under the weight of his own actions. He knew he owed George an apology, but the words caught in his throat, choked by the enormity of his transgression. How could he possibly make amends for what he had done? How could he ever repay such an act of selfless heroism? He was a horrible person. I'm so sorry," Mark finally choked out, the words thick with emotion. Tears streamed down his face, washing away the soot and grime. "I was awful to you. I didn't know." He paused, struggling to catch his breath. "Thank you," he managed to say, his voice cracking. "Thank you for saving my life. I don't deserve it." He closed his eyes, overwhelmed by a wave of self-loathing. He had been so arrogant, so quick to judge, so blind to the humanity of others. And now, he was paying the price. He opened his eyes again, searching George's face for any sign of anger or resentment. But he saw none. Only a quiet understanding, a deep compassion that cut through Mark's defenses like a knife. He had expected condemnation, but he found only forgiveness. "I was wrong," Mark continued, his voice gaining strength. "About everything. About you, about what's important. I was so focused on myself, on getting ahead, that I forgot what it means to be a decent human being." He started to cry even harder, tears of regret and gratitude mingling on his cheeks. He knew an apology wasn't enough, but it was all he had to offer. George listened patiently, his gaze unwavering. When Mark finally finished, his voice hoarse and choked with emotion, George squeezed his shoulder gently. "It's all right, son," he said softly. "We all make mistakes. The important thing is that you learn from them." He paused, his eyes twinkling with a hint of amusement. "Besides," he added with a wry smile, "I've been called worse." He continued, his voice becoming more serious. "Life is a gift, Mark. A precious gift. Don't waste it being angry and impatient. Slow down. Look around. Appreciate the people in your life. And always, always show respect. You never know what someone else has been through." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn coin. He pressed it into Mark's hand. "This is my lucky coin," he said. "I carried it with me through the war. Now, I want you to have it. As a reminder." A siren wailed in the distance, growing louder. The ambulance was arriving. George stood up, offering Mark a hand. "Your life has been spared, son," he said. "Now, go live it. Live it well." The paramedics arrived and carefully loaded Mark onto a stretcher. As they wheeled him towards the ambulance, he reached out and grasped George's hand one last time. His grip was weak, but his eyes were filled with a newfound sincerity. And then, Mark cried. He cried not just from the pain of his injuries, but from the pain of his regret, from the overwhelming gratitude he felt towards George, and from the profound realization of how close he had come to losing everything, not just his life, but his soul. The tears flowed freely, cleansing him, washing away the anger and arrogance that had consumed him for so long. He was no longer the impatient, entitled young man who had stormed into the coffee shop that morning. He was someone different, someone humbled, someone broken, but also someone with a chance to rebuild, to become a better version of himself. He understood now that true strength wasn't about speed or ambition, but about kindness, compassion, and respect. As the ambulance doors closed, he saw George standing there, watching him, a silent guardian angel. He knew, with absolute certainty, that his life would never be the same. The events of that day had changed him forever. He would carry the memory of George's heroism, and his own shame, as a constant reminder of the importance of living a life filled with purpose and meaning. The weight of the lucky coin in his pocket felt like a promise. In the weeks that followed, Mark underwent surgery and physical therapy, slowly recovering from his injuries. But his true healing took place on a much deeper level. He couldn't shake the image of George, the man who had saved his life, the man he had so readily dismissed. He visited George at his small apartment, a modest space filled with photos of his time in the military. They talked for hours, sharing stories, laughing, and learning from each other. Mark learned about George's experiences in Vietnam, the horrors he had witnessed, and the sacrifices he had made. He began to understand the true meaning of service and sacrifice. He also learned about George's struggles with post-traumatic stress, the invisible wounds that he carried with him every day. He realized that everyone, regardless of their age or background, has their own battles to fight. And he vowed to be more understanding, more compassionate, more empathetic. Mark quit his demanding job, the one that had fueled his ambition and driven him to the brink of self-destruction. He found a new job, one that allowed him to make a positive impact on the lives of others. He volunteered at a local soup kitchen, helping those in need. He started spending more time with his family, appreciating the simple joys of life. He became a better son, a better brother, a better friend. He became a better man. The transformation was complete. George and Mark became the best of friends. An unlikely pair, perhaps, separated by age and experience, but united by a shared understanding and a deep respect for one another. They spent countless hours together, sharing meals, going for walks, and simply enjoying each other's company. Mark learned to listen to George's stories, not just about the war, but about life, about love, about loss. He learned about the importance of community, about the value of friendship, and about the power of forgiveness. He saw in George a quiet strength, a resilience that had been forged in the fires of adversity. George, in turn, found in Mark a renewed sense of purpose. He saw in him a chance to pass on his wisdom, to share his experiences, and to make a difference in the life of a younger generation. He saw Mark's transformation as a testament to the power of redemption, a reminder that it's never too late to change, to grow, to become a better person. Their friendship became a beacon of hope for others, a symbol of the power of human connection to bridge divides and heal wounds. They showed the world that even the most unlikely of people can find common ground, can learn from each other, and can build a lasting bond of friendship based on mutual respect and understanding. They were an inspiration. Years passed. Mark continued to live a life guided by the lessons he had learned from George. He became an advocate for veterans, volunteering his time and resources to support their needs. He spoke to schools and community groups, sharing his story and urging others to show respect and compassion. He never forgot the day he mocked George in the coffee shop, or the day George saved his life. Those memories served as a constant reminder of the transformative power of forgiveness and the importance of living a life of purpose. One sunny afternoon, Mark visited George at his apartment. George was sitting on his porch, watching the world go by. Mark sat down beside him, and they sat in comfortable silence for a while, enjoying the peace and quiet. Finally, Mark spoke. "George," he said, "I don't know what I would have done without you. You changed my life." George smiled, a warm, knowing smile. "You changed mine too, son," he said. "You showed me that even an old dog can learn new tricks." He paused, looking out at the horizon. "The world needs more kindness, Mark," he said. "More understanding, more compassion. You have a gift for that now. Use it well." And Mark knew that he would. He would continue to honor George's legacy by living a life of service, by spreading kindness wherever he went, and by always remembering the day he was saved, not just from a burning car, but from himself. This is a story about choices, about consequences, and about the unexpected grace that can emerge from the darkest of moments. It's a story about Mark, a young man who let impatience and arrogance cloud his judgment, leading him down a dangerous path. But it's also a story about George, a veteran whose quiet dignity and selfless heroism offered a beacon of hope in a world that often seems to lack both. It reminds us of the importance of respecting our elders, of honoring their experiences, and of recognizing the sacrifices they have made for our freedom. It teaches us that arrogance and entitlement can lead to devastating consequences, not just for ourselves, but for those around us. But most importantly, it's a story about the transformative power of forgiveness. George's act of saving Mark's life was more than just a physical rescue. It was an act of profound compassion that shattered Mark's preconceived notions and opened his heart to a new way of being. It's a reminder that second chances are possible, that redemption is within reach, and that even the most unlikely of people can find common ground and build meaningful connections. May we all strive to be more like George, offering kindness and understanding even to those who may not deserve it. May we all learn from Mark's mistakes, choosing humility over arrogance and respect over indifference. And may we all remember that a single act of forgiveness can change a life forever.